Welcome to the TEOCO podcast, where we discuss the intersection of telecom, technology, and innovation. Today, we are discussing part 2 of our series of multi-access edge computing with Danny Itzigsohn, TEOCO Senior Director of Technology and Strategy. So welcome back, Danny. This has been such an interesting topic that we decided to create a part 2. So for all our listeners out there, I hope you enjoyed part 1. If you haven't, please go back and give it a listen, because now we're going to jump back into the discussion with Danny. So you've been talking a lot about 5G network slicing and IoT things, instances like connected cars. Is MEC truly critical for these new technologies to be a success, in your opinion?
I believe it will, yes. We don't see this, very much today, because right now we are in the initial stages of 5G. I mean, the first 5G generation was what we call non-standalone, which is basically 5G radio being routed into a 4G core. So all the low latency use cases were not even available in this type of architecture. Now the first service providers that are venturing in what we call standalone 5G, which is basically 5G radio and 5G core, they are building their own cloud native 5G core. This type of architecture will enable low latency communications, the ability to distribute core functions into the edge, all the things that will enable slices, will enable low latency use cases, and will enable IoT use cases, high capacity IoT use cases, and so forth. So we will start seeing, a drive, more, I would say, powerful drive towards MEC deployment, MEC use cases, MEC orchestration, MEC monitoring towards, I would say, anything between, we might start this year, the buzz, but usually will go into 1 year, maybe 2 years into the future. And but certainly a lot of these use cases that we're talking about, specifically the URLLC use cases, and even some of the also what's called the EMBB use cases, the enhanced mobile broadband, everything which is related, for instance, to augmented reality or virtual reality. Let's say that you're going to a museum and you want to see, you have some type of smart glasses or some type of information you want to be overlaid on top of them or on top of other device. That type of enhanced mobile broadband type of capabilities, because you might want to see it in 3D and whatnot, that will happen usually at the MEC center, where all this information will be processed, and that goes under the local services and content, as I said before. So I think that as the technology moves forward, as more and more 5G standalone networks become available, as more 5G cloud native cores are becoming a reality, that will enable slices, that will enable low latency use cases and other type of use cases. And then we will see more and more this drive to the MEC, because I think that this MEC is really an enabler of a lot of value added services that can be monetized at the end of the day. So it's beyond the regular communications that we know of as of today. Also in the IoT space, when I'm talking about analytics done, at the edge of a lot of different sensors, which can be sensors analyzing turbine motion or environmental sensors or sensors in cars or any other type of sensors. Many of them will require, edge computing and edge analytic capabilities.
I hear you mention a lot of these applications are focused around enterprise and factories and sort of business-related services. Do you also see some applications that are more consumer-driven? Like you did mention virtual reality, wearing a virtual reality headset maybe in a museum or other type of environment. Do you see any other applications where MEC will really touch the lives of consumers?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, my personal opinion is, even if we look at the 5G and we look at the three, use cases that have been defined as the vision of 5G, which is the MBB, enhanced mobile broadband, URLC, ultra reliable low latency communications, and MMTC, massive IoT, basically, machine-type communications. Two of them are really geared toward the industry and IoT, the URLLC and the MMTC. They're really geared toward IoT. So we see that pretty much the fabric of IoT is kind of embedded into the IoT, into the 5G vision. But having said that, there's also a consumer use cases, and we mentioned some of them: AR, VR, local content, local downloads, things like that. Even when we talk about a car is really a mixed human IoT device. So you have the consumer, which is the human, which want to hear a good song or have some link to a local business from his map, or to keep the kids in the back row with a nice movie. All of those things are consumer, consumer use cases, or even might be a touristic use case where you are just driving to in a city and suddenly you are crossing a specific point of interest, and suddenly a nice video explaining the history of that statue or that mausoleum or something like that suddenly pops in your screen and you start hearing about these things. So definitely I see many use cases that will cater toward the consumer, but I think that many of the use cases, specifically the low latency and the private network use cases, are going to be geared mainly towards, industry point for zero, whether you are a factory, a campus, a port, and people are talking a lot about that because this is going to be an enabler of a lot of automation and a lot of actuation and a lot of, remote type of controls that today are not available because you cannot really ensure the low latencies, for instance, that these type of use cases require, or the reliability that these use cases require.
Right. So, in terms of for the network itself, for the network service providers, do you see instances where portions of the OS, the operation support services, sort of being deconstructed and delivered at the edge?
Definitely, this is a very good point. The idea is, and we are definitely moving towards that. We have already defined and built a collection and actuation agents that they are containerized, so they are cloud network functions, so they can be basically installed, dynamically installed or deployed in different clouds. So this will enable, local collection and local actuation. At the first instance, still the analytics is going to be done in the central OSS, but more and more we will start, pushing more and more analytics and decision making towards the edge. So it's basically a gradual process. Some of the things will still require to sit, in the center, in the central OSS instance, because when you're talking, for instance, about machine learning or artificial intelligence, sometimes you need big data, and it's very difficult to deploy big data instances in each one of these mechs. So there's going to be a kind of a separation between the things that they require, local actuation that might be very fast, local interaction with the local orchestration, and then the more, I would say, sophisticated analytics that comes with machine learning and AI that usually sits in the centralized place. But definitely, since the network is being decentralized, the idea is that you have user plane functions, which are basically core entities, moving into the edge, and you might have also other core functions like control plane functions moving into the edge, and you have the application functions and orchestration. So you have already a decentralization in a sense of the network into these aggregation points where some processing, analytics, and control is being done. That means that you need to also monitor them and be a participant in these specific closed loops that will happen there. In some cases, a whole 5G slice might, start and end in a mech, and the core, the central core might be almost or not at all participant in that specific slice, and that the um, decisions and the actuation and the orchestration of that slice will happen at the MEC. So you definitely need to be there and monitor and be participant in all those life cycles. It's very, very important.
It sounds like it's getting increasingly complicated, that's for sure. But that some functions will work best in the core, and some functions can be intelligently moved to the edge. Would you say that's the case?
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
So, if you could look into the future, what do you think the telecom network of tomorrow is going to look like in, say, 10 or 20 years from now? Is it going to be different than where it is today?
I believe so. I mean, I truly believe so. I think that there are certain, I would say, trends which are becoming more and more prominent. One is what we call the cloudification of the network. Basically, more and more of the network is situated in clouds. So even they're talking about cloud RAN, cloud radio access network. So for instance, they took, the processing of the radio signal outside the cell site. So things such as baseband units can sit on a cloud, on a nearby cloud. They're talking about cloud, and of course the 5G core, it's cloud-based core, and those MECs will sit on specific localized or edge clouds. So the idea is that cloudification is definitely happening and will happen more and more. The other thing is softwareization. Basically, the classical network elements, as we know, they are being replaced by virtual machines and software. So let's say that you want to have a router functionality, you basically download the router software into a virtualized machine that sits on a regular server and a commodity server. And here, voila, you have a router or a network resource function or a network slice selection function or an authentication function or any other type of function in the network. So basically, what's happening is that the network becoming more and more cloud-based and more software-based. So that means that you need to control them. So we're talking about SDN controllers and orchestrators and things like that. And they're going to become more dynamic in a sense that if you need to pop up a specific functionality or a specific application in a specific data center, you can do it, you can deploy it. And that's the beauty of these cloud network functions and these dynamic deployments and dynamic scaling of resource. So in that sense, I would say that telecom networks are becoming more and more IT networks in that sense, which is the trend that started, some time ago, but now it's becoming, more prevalent. And so this is why I think that cloud providers such as AWS and Google and Microsoft and other will have a more prominent role in these new networks as the future happens. So that's definitely something that I see. Usually, when we talk about network functions, they are like the physical network functions, which are like the legacy, what we call them PNFs, and the virtualized network functions, which we call them VNFs. So there are a lot of still, physical network functions in telecom networks because this is sunk investment, and people want, to continue using it until they sunset it, which might take 5-10 years, depending also in which region of the world we're talking about. But eventually this drive towards virtualization, cloudification, and softwareization will bring more and more the type of architectures that I'm talking about. And this brings a lot of advantages but also some disadvantages, because at the end of the day, if you're talking, for instance, about microservice-based architectures, then you might start injecting micros, because a lot of processes are distributed across different microservices. So you might have start having like inter-microservices latencies, that these are things that you need to control or provide algorithms to minimize or optimize that. So new technologies, new challenges, but a lot of advantages, because otherwise it's going to be very, very difficult to provide to cater to towards these use cases that IoT is bringing and 5G is bringing, which are under these three families of EMBB, URLC, and MMTC, which have subfamilies and subfamilies. You talk about D2X, which are the connected cars. You can talk about connected mines, connected factories, connected ports, smart cities, medical, telemedicine, and more and more and more. And I think that drive towards, more elastic networks, scalable networks, controllable networks, it's something that it can only happen with this type of architectures. For instance, even if we speak about slices, a slice is virtually it's a partition of the network towards a specific use case, which is accompanied by specific SLAs. So you might have a slice which is requires high availability and low latency. You might have another slice which require high bandwidth. You have another slice which require a lot of capability, basically a lot of sensors in a specific area. And so what you're doing is you have only one network, but you're basically converting it into multiple virtual networks that all of them have to coexist together, be orchestrated together, and so they need to scale up, scale down, and that's the only way to basically do that is with this type of cloudified and softwareized architecture that 5G is leading into.
Well, it sounds like 10 or 20 years out is going to look very, very different from today.
Yes.
What an exciting time, huh? I have to say. So thank you, Danny. You brought up some great points for maybe some future discussions and future podcasts. Network slicing, network function virtualization, all of these topics. Really, you can't talk about one without talking about others. So I just want to thank you for your time today. This is such an interesting and exciting topic, and clearly it's just in its early stages with a lot more to come, I'm sure. For our listeners out there, thank you again for joining us. Please be sure to share today's discussion with your friends and coworkers if you enjoyed it. You can visit our full library of podcasts at TEOCO.com or on our new Spotify channel. And if you have any follow-up questions for Danny, or if you have suggestions for future topics for our podcast, please be sure to send your comments and suggestions to us at podcast@teoco.com. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.